On this episode, I get to talk to my friend Christianne Beringer about a few of our favorite things: comfort food, recipes, and reading. She's a wife and a busy mother of 2 middle schoolers, so I was lucky to find a night she could sit down and talk with us. Christianne shares her mom's recipe for meatloaf and her grandma's mac and cheese, a cherished family dish that her grandmother has never written down. Christianne loves to cook, even though she says it's sometimes a struggle with a busy family, which means once in a while they resort to concession stand food for supper. She's active in her community and church ministry, an avid reader who inspires me to read more books. She served in the South Dakota Army National Guard for 6 years, plays in a women's golf league, works full-time as a marketing and comms professional, and Christianne can't walk past a piano without playing it, which means her grandma is the talk of the senior center when she spontaneously plays for them. While you're listening, head to randomsweets.com where you'll find Mary's meatloaf recipe, along with photos of the dish and Christianne and her beautiful family. If you've listened to a few episodes of Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens, thank you for tuning in as I experiment a little bit with show formats. If this is your first one, welcome to a place where we embrace the warm and cozy spirit of the Midwest. I'm your host, Stacy Mergenthal. Now let's go talk with Christianne. I hope this one leaves you smiling. Well, Christianne Beringer, welcome to Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm so glad to have you here tonight. A rare night where I get to talk to you because you have such a busy family and activities going on that it's hard to find some time. So I'm glad that you carved some out to share some fun stories with us tonight, and food, of course, which we're always here for the food.
Of course.
Well, you always are making, we've known each other for a long, long time, many years, and something that we have in common is we are both foodies, and you make a lot of food at home, you make great meals, and you kind of come from a family of foodies too. I think you'll probably share with us today. And you have a busy family, you have children that are in middle and elementary school. You'll have to remind me of their ages, but just sometimes you said, I think when we were talking earlier, you said something about sometimes you have to resort to concession stand food.
Yes. Had a hot dog the other night.
Yeah, see, and that's not so bad. I mean, was a hockey mom, and boy, I miss those walking tacos and the early morning at the ice rink with the breakfast pizza. I mean, I don't get breakfast pizza anymore.
Right.
So I just want you to share a little bit about your family, and you're a Midwesterner. You grew up in the Midwest in South Dakota, and just talk a little bit about the community and your family.
Yeah, so I grew up in a relatively small town, just Volga, not too far from Brookings. And I've lived in this area my entire life. I thought about leaving and never did. And now I'm glad that I stayed. My parents are still in Volga. My sister and her husband and kids live in Volga. And I'm just a hop, skip, and a jump away in the big city of Brookings. So we're all still really close. And I mean, I grew up with a majority of my extended family all very near, and we got together all the time. And, it was dinner after church on Sundays, and spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and both my grandpas were farmers. So there were a lot of late suppers, but, and growing up, if my dad was helping at the farm, sometimes we'd eat pretty late. But I remember, we always had those meals together, and that's something that I've just continued to do with my kids. And yeah, it gets harder these days, but it's just something that I really like doing.
I like that you have that memory of doing that with your family, and that you're being intentional then about doing that with your family now, with your kids. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so today you're going to share a couple of really, this is like ultimate down-home comfort food on this episode.
It is.
And you're a foodie, and we've been friends for a long time. And I think that our listeners are just going to love hearing from you often. So I said, just pick a couple recipes. Don't get overwhelmed because I want you to
Right.
come back many times. And these are the two that you picked that you're going to share today, and we're going to talk a little bit about them. So why don't you first tell me the two recipes that you're going to share today?
Okay, so yeah, like you said, I love to cook and I love to try elaborate things and different things. But when you told me to think of a couple of recipes, I immediately went to my mom's meatloaf and my grandma's mac and cheese.
Mm, perfect. And the mac and cheese, I said, send me the recipes, and you're like, there's not even a recipe for the mac and cheese. So I am super excited to learn about this one too. So, well,
Yeah.
let's start with the meatloaf,
Okay.
and I have to get it out of my system to say, Ma, the meatloaf. You haven't seen the movie, but
I
Wedding
know.
Crashers, there's a scene in there where he's asking about meatloaf, and then he yells, and so Jason and I are often like, Ma, the meatloaf. So I had to get that out of my system. Now,
Okay.
so let's talk about your mom, Mary,
Yes.
and the story behind the meatloaf, and then let's share the actual recipe, which I'll have these recipes on randomsweets.com.
Okay.
And I did make the meatloaf today and took some pictures, so I'll have it on there. But let's talk about Mary's meatloaf.
All right. So I had it in my head that I've been eating this meatloaf my whole life. And, making it now as a mom, my kids love it. They're both middle schoolers and they can be finicky eaters sometimes, but they love this meatloaf. And yeah, I feel like I've been eating it my entire life. And so when you wanted the story behind the meatloaf, I was like, well, I can't just say I've just been eating it my whole life. So I had to ask my mom.
Oh,
And where did you get this recipe? How long have you had this recipe? And I think this is the part that you're really going to love.
yay.
So my mom sent me a couple of pictures and a couple of texts about it. She has a cookbook, and the title of the cookbook is What's Cooking? And the Volga chapter of Beta Psi put this cookbook together using recipes from the 1976 to 1979 issues of the Volga Tribune, the local newspaper.
Oh my goodness.
They had a column during that time called What's Cooking? And people submitted their recipes, and Beta Psi put this cookbook together. So when I say I've been eating this meatloaf my entire life, I have, because I was born in 1979.
Which was
And
completely a meatloaf era.
right? My family gives me a lot of grief about being a 70s baby, but we give you meatloaf, so so yeah, it's so good. And I mean, I probably should try other meatloafs, but I don't want to.
I don't think meatloaf is something that you have to try other people's. I think if you find one that you like, I think you need to stick with it. So
Okay.
does she know who submitted that recipe? Like, does it have a name that goes with it?
It I'm sure it does. And
Mm.
we even looked at the cookbook on Saturday and I didn't even think about it. So I'm gonna have to find it. I'll sneak over to their house and take a look, and we can hopefully give credit to someone from the 70s that came up with this meatloaf recipe, because it's
Well,
so good.
yeah, and it's just fun because you might still know some of the family,
Yeah.
that recipe kind of originated from. And there's obviously another family in the area that's probably eating the exact same meatloaf, saying, I
Right.
won't eat anyone else's meatloaf.
Yep. Yeah.
So for people who are listening to this and they don't know what meatloaf is, we'll talk about how you make it. So you'll walk through the recipe, but first I have to tell you that I asked Kalani, so I asked my daughter yesterday, do you like meatloaf? Because honestly, I haven't made meatloaf for them since they were probably really little kids, and I don't know if they didn't like it or something, and why I've never made it made meatloaf. I can't even remember the last time. But I pulled out my mom's recipe today, so that's what I would have made the last time I ever made it. So we can talk about
Okay.
that in a little bit. But we have to talk about meatloaf. So tell us how to make it.
So my meatloaf is it's just ground hamburger, and oh gosh, I don't even have it in front of me. That's how prepared I am. It's like a pound or a pound and a half of hamburger, and you add breadcrumbs and egg and milk. It's all pretty simple, salt and pepper, and we add sage, ground sage to ours, and onion, of course. And you just mix that all together and put it in your bread pan, and mine bakes for about an hour. And then I top it. It's kind of like a barbecue sauce, maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
you mix ketchup and brown sugar and nutmeg and ground mustard. And you put that on and just bake it for another 30 minutes, and you have meatloaf.
Okay, so I love the sauce. Now, I'm just going off memory too, but you're right. It was a pound and a half of ground beef and 2 eggs. It was 3/4 a cup of breadcrumbs, or like panko breadcrumbs is what I used. And what I actually had on hand was Italian breadcrumbs, so it added a little more seasoning to it probably. But
Sure.
and then 3/4 a cup of milk, I think. And I do know just from making meatballs and stuff that one thing that I did, and it weirds me out. So, but I know that this is what you have to do. And so, do you do this? Is not stir, but do you combine the seasonings, the eggs, and the milk and everything by hand? Do you squish it because you just don't want to overwork the meat?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you really
It's a
have to
weird
just get in
thing.
there.
If you're a texture person, you might want to have someone else make your meatloaf.
Well, I didn't have that option today, so I get a medal because I made meatloaf with my own hands. But I have to tell you, I was so excited about that sauce because, first of all, in the meatloaf, like you said, you use sage. I've seen that before. It adds a really good flavor.
Yeah.
A hint of flavor, right? Like it's not overpowering, but
Right.
I could taste it, and I liked the combination with the meat. But that sauce, oh my gosh. Okay, so I grew up with a recipe that it was just hamburger, a tablespoon of onion, whereas yours is, I think, a half a cup of diced onion.
Yeah.
We weren't onion people. Like my mom didn't use onions and things. And then she used cracker crumbs, so like saltine cracker crumbs. And I see some people mix ketchup into the meat, but also they're just topping it with ketchup. That's the recipe that I have from my mom, is they're just topping it with ketchup.
Yeah.
Well, your sauce, that mixture of that brown sugar, I mean, it was only like a 4th cup of ketchup, and I thought, well, you gotta be kidding me. This can't be enough sauce for the top. Do I have to double this? I should have asked her. And I'm like, just do it the way it says on the card.
Yeah.
See what happens. It smelled so terrific. And then I baked it, and it caramelized on the top and the edges. Oh my goodness.
I don't know what it is, but it's so good. And, I think, a lot of the traditional meatloaf recipes are just the cracker crumbs and milk and egg and meat and top it with some ketchup. And maybe that's why a lot of people are just like, meatloaf, just because there isn't really any depth and there isn't really anything to it. It's just a meat loaf.
Right. So why wouldn't you just have a hamburger with ketchup on it? Why go to the trouble of making meatloaf?
Yeah.
In those kinds of recipes. But this one, okay, so when I talked to Kalani and said, do you like meatloaf? She's like, she's like, no. And then she said, well, I mean, what's even in it, She said, I think it's just the name. It's a meatloaf. And I said, I completely agree. And so today, when I did have a slice, I had taken some pictures first, so it got a little bit cold, the slice that I had. And so I thought, well, how am I going to, I fried it. So I fried this piece, and then that sauce that's on there, it kind of caramelizes a little bit more. And so I've decided that I'm going to rename it too. We're gonna, I think, start calling it fried hamburger slices with caramelized brown sugar sauce.
There you go.
And then I think people will be more receptive to eating meatloaf.
Yeah, absolutely. It's elevated.
Right. No, it was really delicious. Have you ever, here's my question, because of course Jason's not home, and so I froze the rest of it, hoping, to preserve it so that when he comes home, he'll be able
Sure.
to eat it with me. And have you ever frozen it? You probably don't have leftovers. I mean, a loaf pan isn't that much. Like, it serves one family for a meal, which is great, and then you don't have leftovers.
Right. We, when the kids were smaller, they didn't eat as much and we would have leftovers, but Dustin and I, and of course, our days of paying for daycare and paying for our mortgage and all the things, we didn't go out for lunch a lot, and we just kind of limited ourselves. So we eat our leftovers, and, that would be my lunch the next day. And it's getting harder and harder to do that because my son is 14 and may eat us out of house and home, which is
And
fine.
it's only going to get worse. Yeah.
And it's, honestly, if I make a meal and they like it, he will go back up to the counter and he kind of looks at me and Dustin and he's like, "Are you taking this for lunch tomorrow?"
Oh, he's such a sweet guy.
And it's usually, yes, we're taking it for lunch, but if you want more, take more. That's fine. We can figure something else out. So I know that he really liked it when he's up there like pondering, how much more of this can I take?
Right. Oh, so you haven't frozen it. You don't know if it freezes.
I haven't.
Okay.
I mean, I would think that it would.
I think so too. So I'll let you know if it works, but that's what I did so that we can enjoy it and it doesn't go to waste. But I also had contemplated doing it so I have a pan that is like a 9x13 pan size, and it has 8 cavities for mini loaves.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. I want to do it the traditional way that your recipe has. But that's another idea too. People can use the mini loaf pans, make smaller portions, and then if it does freeze well, which I don't know why it wouldn't, maybe the sauce isn't going to be quite as caramelized when you reheat it. I don't know. But I also saw that people will do the meatloaves in muffin pans and make little muffin cups. So there's different variations of what to do with it. And saltine crackers, or I also saw a couple recipes for meatloaf where people use oatmeal for the whatever you call it. It's not necessarily the binder, right? Because the eggs would be considered that. I don't really know. I'm not a chef. That's the whole point.
I know. Well, and I have a meatball recipe that we can certainly talk about another day, and it's kind of similar veins of tastes, and the sauces are a little similar, but that uses oatmeal instead of a breadcrumb.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah, and you don't taste or the texture for these breadcrumbs, obviously, that I use, the panko ones, they just kind of melt into the meat because they're so tiny. If people use crackers and they're not super fine, almost powdery, then you're actually going to see that. And then that's when it becomes a texture thing for me. So I really loved this. This didn't have that, and it is delicious. So leftovers, what do you do with the leftovers? Just heat them up, or are you a meatloaf sandwich kind of person?
I've never done the meatloaf sandwich. I should try it, but I just heat it up and it reheats nice, and it still tastes pretty darn good the next day. And
I was thinking about putting it on like a crusty bread, and then maybe some kind of an Italian, like a mozzarella or some sort of a cheese, that just turn it into sort of like a meatball sub, but you're using meatloaf instead.
Yeah,
I don't know
would be good.
for sure. But of course, bread, carbs, I got to have my carbs. So all right. Well, that's a good one. And like I said, we'll share that recipe on the blog. So if you've never tried meatloaf, you can give this a try. Or if you want to adapt a little bit of this to your own family's meatloaf recipe, or if people want to send me their meatloaf recipe or just comment about the variations of how they do it, I really would love to hear all the different ways that people grew up with meatloaf, because like I said, mine even says 2 pounds good hamburger. Now, I don't know if that meant don't use the bad hamburger. Why does it say good hamburger? But It's in my handwriting from like 1990 probably, so who knows.
Oh,
So
man.
let's talk about the next fun one.
Yes, my grandma's mac and cheese. And I had to ask her about this too. Like, how long have you been making this mac and cheese? Because my entire childhood, that's what she made for us. And so I gave her a call and said, how long have you been making this? Because she made it when I was growing up, and my dad made it when I was growing up, and found out that, she made it for my dad and my uncle when they were kids. And so it's just
Oh.
the mac and cheese that she's always been making. I said, well, did you have a recipe? And she goes, no.
Grandmas
She
don't
said,
have recipes.
it's just noodles and melted cheese and milk. And I was like, well, I know. I know that's what we do, but so yeah, it's, I don't care for boxed macaroni. I'll eat it if I have to, but I prefer my homemade mac and cheese. And it's just your regular macaroni noodles, make as directed. And in just like a small saucepan, you put some milk in there. I kind of eyeball it. So I maybe do like a fourth of the way up in the pan. Somewhere end up being between a fourth and a half of the pan. I don't know. My
Okay.
sister is constantly, what's the recipe for the mac and cheese? I'm like, there isn't
Yeah.
one. I don't know. Just make it. But yeah, so you just milk in the pan, and I usually do like 3 tablespoons of butter, and usually just the American cheese slices, and I'll do like 6 or 7 slices. I have found, and what I do more often than American cheese slices now, the Velveeta cheese, and it comes in
Mhm.
those little. They have it all broken up now, where you can get like the little packs in the box.
Little packs in the box.
So it's the block of Velveeta cheese, but then it's like
Okay.
5 smaller packs inside.
Are you serious? I didn't know that.
Yeah, when I
Oh.
discovered that, it was amazing because you'd have to like cut off this hunk of cheese, and then what do you do with the rest? And it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
last forever. But yeah, they have these little, like, I don't even know how big they are, but now I just use one of those little blocks
One
and
box.
throw that
And
in
that,
there. Yep.
okay.
And just heat until the cheese is melted. And when your noodles are done, you drain them and then just pour the cheese sauce over, and that's it.
So it is just milk and butter and this Velveeta cheese. That's the
Yeah,
sauce.
that's it.
Wow. And so you're using like elbow macaroni, right?
Yep.
And that's always a tough thing to know how much. I, I either have way too many noodles or not enough noodles,
And
spaghetti
I
especially.
do I do run into that. And the tough thing with this mac and cheese, it's not real great the next day. And I think any kind
Mm,
of, you know, noodle dish like that, it kind of dries out a little bit if you try and eat it the next day, unless, you eyeball incorrectly and you make way more sauce than you need, which has happened.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I always run it, I'm dumping noodles into the pan. It's like, oh, I don't think that's enough. And then pretty soon you're like, that's too many noodles.
Guess we're having goulash tomorrow.
Yeah. But
And
so
so this one block of cheese, this amount though, is enough to serve your family of 4.
yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think I usually try to do it like I just get the regular sized box of elbow macaroni, and I try to do like half the box.
Okay.
And that's all a nice big bowl of mac and cheese.
Okay. Because like you said, you don't really want leftovers
Right.
necessarily of the sauce, especially.
Yeah.
Okay. And that makes sense because it gets a little bit thick and
Mm-hmm.
it's not as creamy, I suppose, using that Velveeta. But wow, it's so funny. Grandma's, I think about, so my grandma, now I'm trying to think, she didn't make a mac and cheese, but she made, really, it was just elbow macaroni with some sort of probably just a milk or cream sauce.
Yeah.
That was it. There was no cheese in there. So every grandma, I think, needs, and Kalani and Sajan's great grandma Esther used to make a really good mac and cheese. And she's no longer with us, so I don't know, but I'm sure she didn't have it written down either.
I don't think grandmas ever do.
No. But you should, because Preston's going to want to know, or Lillian's going to want to know at some point. They're,
Yeah.
going to get older and want to make that either when they're in high school or off to college, because this is something that the college kids age. I mean, my kids, they're young, early 20s. They could easily make this.
Well, and it's an relatively inexpensive thing to make, and it's better probably than the ramen noodles that I lived off of in college.
Right.
A little more filling. But yeah, my sister, she still has not quite mastered it. So Nicole, when if you're listening, I'm sorry, but you have not mastered it.
Uh-oh, I can hear sisterly rival right now.
Right. Yeah, I think I kind of took all of the cooking skills. She didn't really get any. But I love her.
Everybody has to get something, she got something from the family too.
Yes, exactly. But my niece, her daughter, she's 16. She likes to cook, and she makes great grandma's macaroni and cheese for the family because Nicole hasn't quite mastered it.
Oh, okay. Well, at least somebody in their family can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're keeping it going, and my dad's brother and his family, they live down in Texas and kind of in that area. So we've got people down in Texas that eat that macaroni and cheese, and we're all keeping it going.
And your grandma's name is Beverly. We should say that, because we talk about grandma, and then we don't forget they have a name, right?
Yes.
And she's in Brookings.
Yep.
So she's still, and you were able to give her a call, and you get to go and see her, and yeah. Well, so who has influenced you the most? Or I shouldn't even say the most, because I don't want you to pick favorites, and then your parents are listening and they're like, oh, Christianne. So what has been an influence then in your life for cooking or baking?
Well, both of my parents. My mom's an excellent baker. She used to do cakes. I wouldn't call it professionally. Her mother made cakes, graduation cakes and wedding cakes and things like that. And then mom, I think somewhere along the line, started helping her, and then she pretty much took over, and she did countless weddings and graduations and birthdays and all kinds of things, to the point where my graduation cake had a fountain. It was a little over the top.
A fountain. Oh my God.
Like think the wedding cakes of like the 80s and 90s, like the big tiered, and there was a fountain on the bottom. Yeah, I had a fountain for my graduation.
I forgot about those.
It was pretty elaborate. I mean, I was the only kid who had a fountain in the graduation cake. So
I bet.
Yeah, but I mean, she made my sister's wedding cake. She made my wedding cake. And when she quit doing all of that, she would still make cakes for us, and she'd kind of start to experiment. So for the kids, for my kids and my niece and nephew, she'd make like a Swiss cake roll cake, or she'd experiment with different fillings in her cakes, and she makes the best bars and different desserts and things like that. So I don't bake near as much as I would like to, unless the Chiefs are playing and they're not doing very well.
Then you go into the kitchen, and I remember that now.
Yep, that was a couple of seasons ago.
It's hard to bake when you have, first of all, you work full time, you have 2 children that are extremely busy and active. Yes. You're active, you golf, you do a lot of different things.
Yep.
And so you're already having to cook meals to put on the table. The baking isn't always something that gets to happen at this stage in your life.
Right.
And so, but Maybe we'll be able to get your mom to come on and be a guest sometime because I love bars. But what about your dad?
Oh, my dad. So he's a grill master. It's just incredible. He has a Traeger now, but he's had different smokers and different things. And I don't think I've ever had a bad piece of meat from him. It's always just amazing. Um, and if you can grill it, if you can figure out a way to grill it, you will grill it. We do a lot of grilled pizza, which
Oh.
is amazing. I don't have a Traeger. We have one of his old smokers, and it works just as well. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we do a lot of grilled pizza, just homemade pizzas. Um, in fact, we were just at my parents' house celebrating a late Christmas, and my dad, I don't even remember what cut of steak it was, but we had steak and we did some seafood. But then uh, him and my mom made smoked creme brulee,
Oh.
which was so good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but my dad loves to experiment, and he loves to cook and try
Mm-hmm.
all these new things. And he was always part, it wasn't just my mom in the kitchen, and they both worked full time when I was growing up, and they helped each other, and I saw both of them in the kitchen. And dad still does a lot of the cooking, and so I think I get a lot of it from him as far as, the cooking and the savory dishes and things like
Sure.
that. Um, but yeah, and my sister and I growing up, mom and dad were working, and I mean, I feel like I probably helped out and
We'll ask your mom.
I remember making a lot of toast for my sister.
A lot of what? Toast?
Toast. That was our big.
Yeah,
We'd have to make her
good.
cinnamon toast for her
Mm.
until she, was in high school still. Um, but yeah, I just, it was one of those things where I guess I didn't really think about it, but I always grew up that it was family meals and getting together and eating and family supper, even if we were crazy busy and supper wasn't until 9 o'clock at night. And I still just kind of do that. Like, that's one time a day we can sit down and
Mm.
we can either talk about our day or we can just eat really fast and run out the door to where we need to go. But, it's at
Right.
least here's a little snippet of time that we're sitting down together. I don't know.
Right. It's comforting
Yeah.
for the kids too. Even, I mean, they would never say that. They would never admit it, but
Right.
they'll look back and say, I remember that my mom did that. I mean, you're making those memories now, which is very, very sweet.
Yeah.
Well, this podcast is called Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens. So I asked you, do you have a recipe for funeral potatoes, or as I also, in our family, we call them cheesy hash browns. And so
Mm-hmm.
you sent me your recipe, and it's called hash brown potatoes.
Yep.
And it's um, just pretty. I didn't compare it to mine, but it's probably about exactly the same. I don't see anything in here that I don't use. So it's the frozen hash browns.
Mm-hmm.
You're using the shredded hash browns, not the cubed.
Correct.
Butter, cream of chicken soup. If I'm double batching it, I'll do 1 can of cream of chicken and 1 can of cream of onion.
Oh,
That's just if I'm double batching it. Otherwise, I just do the cream of chicken. And
right.
then sour cream, grated cheddar cheese, onion, salt, pepper, and then the melted butter and the crushed up corn flakes on the top.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what mine is too.
Yeah.
So,
And they're so good. It's like one of my favorite things.
yeah. And I don't know about you, but do you make it very often, or do you, because
I don't.
except for holidays or get-togethers, me either.
Right. Yeah, it's holidays and I think maybe
Funerals.
once I made it for a Super Bowl. Unfortunately, my kids do not share the same passion for funeral potatoes as
Yeah.
I do. So and it makes a lot. So, I
Mm-hmm.
have to think about that. Like, I'm not just going to make it for Sunday supper with just the four of us because my kids are going to complain through the whole thing. And then I'm going to have 3/4 of a pan. And what am I going to
Yeah.
do? And I think I have frozen them before. And with the cornflakes, that doesn't really work out very well, but
Right.
the rest of
Well,
it is okay.
I was in charge of making the cheesy hash browns for Christmas this last year, and um, I saved aside what I couldn't fit in my big foil pan because I double batched it
Mm-hmm.
and put that in the freezer immediately. So that's an uncooked batch.
Oh,
And then I believe, yep. So then when I came home, I still had some left that had been baked, and I immediately froze that. So I'll be able to figure out, does it work? I mean, I already
right.
know you can freeze the already made, but I'm
Yeah.
interested in knowing if that batch that I set aside that I hadn't baked yet, if I can thaw that in the fridge and then bake it, because it doesn't have the cornflakes or anything on it. So
Right.
lay it out in a pan and see how that works. Because, if you can double batch it and do something like that, then it's nice to have, you could do little
Yeah.
batches in those little, like the mini loaf
Mm-hmm.
pans, the aluminum ones that you just, the throwaway ones, or recycle that, whatever. But um, if you could put those in the freezer, and then you and Dustin could just have your own little servings, even though the kids don't like it, and then that could last you a year, right?
Right.
So we'll
Yeah.
see.
That would be
Uh,
good. And that's the trouble that I run into sometimes. I have inherited, I think, from my grandma. I think my dad always said my grandma, and even my dad, I make way more food than we ever need. And
oh
I've had to, you know, learn, okay, yes, I can freeze this and it'll be completely fine and we can thaw it out and eat it later. So we've been doing that a lot more just because it's like, okay, we all ate, served up our leftovers for the next day. Why do I still have so much food?
Mm-hmm.
And I do it especially like if I make a chili or beer cheese soup or something like that. We'll try and freeze whatever's left, and then we can quick thaw it out and have it on a Friday night or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I figuring out like, okay, my kids aren't going to eat this, and especially it's not going to be long before my kids are gone, and then I'm going to have
Yeah.
to learn how to cook for two people. And I'm probably still going to make way too much. So if I can figure out, okay, well, I'll just make it in this little pan and I'll freeze the rest.
Mm-hmm. Or if your kids are close enough, you'll share with them. You'll be like, I made chili, I'm bringing you some.
Yes, come and get this food.
That happens too. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have a couple more things to talk about before we wrap it up here, but
Yes.
you are an avid reader. I mean, I have never known somebody in my life who reads more than you do. How many books did you read in 2022?
40.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a big number, and I'm very proud of myself because my goal was 30, and
Mm.
I just flew through some of these books. But my cousin, who I get my love of reading from, I think she read like 75 books last year or something.
What's her name?
So Jennifer.
Jennifer. Okay.
Yep, she lives down in Nebraska. Um, but grew up in Volga, and she was always part of my life. And
Mm-hmm.
she's a librarian, which I should have done that. Didn't. Yeah, so I mean, 40 is a lot of books, and a lot of people think I'm crazy, but I have bigger goals.
So first of all, you would have made a great librarian. You still could be a librarian. You could still
I
work at the
could.
library.
I
Now
could.
you'd have to be, I know us. You'd have to work on your library voice. My sister
Yeah.
Heidi, she's a librarian in Lake Benton now, and we laugh about having to use library voices. But what's your goal for reading for books for 2023?
So I set my goal at 40
Okay.
because I knew I could do it because I did it last
Mm-hmm.
year. But of course, there's that part of me that says, well, now I have to pass that.
You're competing with yourself.
I know.
Do you do, I think I know the answer to this. Do you do physical books or do you do like a Kindle or Audible? I think you do physical books.
I do physical books.
Yes, me too. I
Yep.
love it.
Yeah. My mom got me a Kindle years ago, and I think I read maybe one book on it before my kids, who were little at the time, discovered that they could get games on it, and then I never saw it again. Uh,
Thanks, Grandma Mary.
Right. Yeah, that was a fun little iPad that you got your grandkids. But it was okay because I need that physical book, and I need to turn the
Mhm.
page, and I need to close it, and
Smell the paper.
yes,
Yeah.
there's times when I just kind of have to close it and like take a deep breath because what I'm
Mhm.
reading is so intense or so emotional, and I, what do I just set the Kindle down and have it? I need the physical opening and closing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I read a lot of books, but not near as many as you, which I don't know why. I have more time than you do, but um, uh, being an empty nester is interesting. That's a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation. It's yeah, but so I often will. You're on Goodreads, so if
Hmm.
anybody doesn't know what that is, it's just look at it. It's fun, and we're you and then Alice Clapstead, two people that I pay attention to on Goodreads and what you're reading
Yeah.
and your
She
recommendations.
is
But
a reader.
mhm. You had texted me once, I think, and then gave me this recommendation, and this is one by far one of my all-time favorite books that I've ever read. Then I recommended it to my sister Heidi. She read it and loved it as well. But it's called The Kitchen Front, a novel by Jennifer
Hmm.
Ryan. And if
Hmm.
you I can't really explain. I mean, again, look that book up and see if it's something that would interest you. I didn't think it would because it's sort of the um, World War II.
Yep. The historical
and
fiction.
and I was like, well, that's not me. I don't really, but it has to do with cooking and being in the kitchen, so maybe I
Yep.
will. And I loved it, and I
Yep.
would never read a book twice, but I would read this book again.
Yeah.
So I want to know today if you just could give us one book recommendation or an author that you love. And this is probably the hardest question you'll ever be asked in your life,
Right. Yeah.
but you'll be back. So give us one recommendation.
I've been going back and forth over this for days because there's so much, and I read so many different genres, and I love so many different
Mhm.
things. So I decided I'm just going to recommend what I'm reading right now at this moment, and it actually works out really well because I think this is kind of right up your alley too.
Oh, good.
Um, so the author is Frederick Bachman,
Okay.
and some people might recognize that because there is a movie coming out called A Man Named Otto
Oh, okay. Yeah.
with Tom Hanks. And
Hmm.
that movie is based on Frederick Bachman's book, A Man Called Uwe, which
Oh,
I
okay.
think was the first Frederick Bachman book I read years ago. Reminded me of my maternal grandfather, made me think of him. And I've just been devouring Frederick Bachman books since then. And I'm currently reading The Winners, which is the third book in a series. The first one is called Beartown, and the second one
Oh.
is Us Against You. And Frederick Bachman is from Sweden. So all of his books are set in Sweden. They're all written in Swedish, and everything that we get is obviously translated to English.
Hmm.
But Beartown, Us Against You, and The Winners is all about this tiny little town, and I believe it's called Beartown. Uh, Tiny little town in the woods, and their hockey team.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
And when mom gave me Beartown, and I was like, it's about hockey. Like, I don't know anything about hockey. It's not that I don't like it. I just don't know anything about hockey. And am I really going to be able to get into a book about hockey?
Hmm.
1000% I'm into this book about hockey.
Oh my
Because
gosh.
it's not just hockey. It's the town, and it's
Mhm.
the love and support for their team, and it's the kids on this team, and the things that happen to these communities and their rival community. And I've laughed, and I've cried, and I've been shocked, and I am
Oh.
just like burning through these books. I read Beartown, I don't know, it was probably a couple of months ago. And I also got The Winners, which is his latest one. But then
Mhm.
I discovered there was a second one in there. And I was like, well, I can't read the third one. I got to find the second one. So I went to the library and I found it. And I think I read it in about a week.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
so yeah, my recommendation right now, even though I have a million, is
Mm.
pretty much anything by Frederick Bachman. He has some wonderful books, and he's just a great storyteller. But for you specifically, Stacy, it's Beartown and Us Against You and the Winners. I'm not even done with the Winners, but I'm going to recommend it anyways.
Good. No, yeah, that's good. I will check those out. Add them to my list. And you're a sports fan. You're a Chiefs fan. So
Yes.
yes, like you said, it's hockey, but you understand
Mm-hmm.
the sports, and then you have children who are on sports teams, and so I'm sure it's easy to connect to things that are happening, and we have a small community and
Yeah.
all of those things. So
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
One more question before we're going to do this quick little surprise
Okay.
questions, and then we'll wrap it up. But
Okay.
do you have a Midwest cafe, restaurant, or bakery to recommend?
Oh, and I've been thinking about this one. We go out to eat fairly frequently. The pheasant, of course, will always be a favorite of mine here in Brookings. And I'm going to say this one, even though I haven't been there in a very long time, and I know it's different owners, but I know it's still good. I have the best memories of the Ridge in Bruce.
The Ridge?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right off the highway there,
Mm-hmm.
when you come into Bruce. And I haven't been there for many years either, but have always had really good food there. I
Yeah.
just didn't even remember. Oh, the
Yeah.
Ridge and Bruce,
So when I was growing up, my grandparents, my mom's parents, lived on a farm just outside of Bruce, and I was at either one of my grandparents all the time, but we would spend like a week or two each summer with the grandparents out on the farm. And every mid morning, we went into the Ridge because Grandma and Grandpa had to go have coffee. And then we'd be back mid afternoon because Grandma and Grandpa had to go have coffee.
coffee.
And yeah. So and that's probably why, like, one of my favorite scents is just black coffee and toast, like buttered toast,
Mm,
because I spent a lot of time around it with a lot of like Scandinavian people. Apparently, we're
the
coffee and toast people.
coffee and toast. Yep.
But yeah, I was always there, and it was chicken strips and cheese balls and coffee and toast, and it's just always at the Ridge.
Yep. Yeah, and like you said, it's changed hands a lot over the year, but the building is still
Yeah.
there, and it just keeps that if people don't know Bruce, but it's a tiny little town, and I've talked about
Yeah.
Bruce before because my dad grew up on a farm, I think he said northeast of Bruce, the Perry family, and then I talk about 80 honey all the time,
Oh,
my
yeah.
all-time favorite honey. You and I could just do an episode about 80 honey.
Right.
The fudge sauce, I kind of thought, is she going to do fudge sauce? We'll have to talk about
Uh,
that another time.
I
So
figured we'd have like a dessert
let's,
episode or
yeah, let's
something.
do it. I like that
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do some surprise questions, and then I'll let you go because
Oh.
your kids are probably like, Mom, Mom. All right, pickles, sweet or dill?
Oh man. Dill.
You can't even decide that. You're
No,
so
I
funny.
can't. But
Oh,
sweet at the holidays. I gotta have my sweet gherkin at Christmas on my, yeah. But dill mostly.
olives. Me too. I
Green.
like dill. Green or black? I didn't even say green or black. Okay, green.
Yeah,
Me too. I
green.
don't like
Green
black.
olives.
Bananas. Slightly green or definitely yellow?
Oh, maybe slightly green.
Oh, you're in the camp with Jason. If it's got green on it, I'm not eating it, so it turns definitely yellow.
I need it a little firmer.
Oh, okay. You're still my friend. Pizza, pepperoni or sausage?
Sausage.
Okay. Dessert, cheesecake or pie?
Oh, see, now that's not fair.
Cheesecake pie?
Well, okay, you know what we do? This is what we do in my family. I'm going to have a half a slice of cheesecake and a half a slice of pie.
Oh, I like that answer, especially if it's peanut butter pie.
Oh,
All right,
I've
last
had
one. Milk from a bowl of cereal. Drink it or dump it?
dump it.
Me too. Yep.
Well, I mean, if it's,
Mm.
Cocoa Puffs, then I might drink it, but.
Oh, well, each to his own.
Yeah, well, and I'm not a good milk drinker, much to the dismay of my dairy farmer family, but oh well.
Well, Christianne, we are rolling up to the end here, and I have like the biggest smile, the biggest grin on my face, because I am just so happy that you came and shared these recipes and this conversation. I mean, what we just did, this is exactly why I wanted to start a podcast.
Yeah.
This just makes me so happy, and I'm just glad that I got to do this first non-family sort of one with you, and without the first one when Jen put me in the hot seat. Now this just really makes me very happy. So thank you very much for taking
Thank you
time,
for
and
thinking of me. This was so much fun.
we'll have you back. So think about what your next episode's going to be, and
Absolutely.
What books you'll recommend. And it's really been lovely to chat with you. So thank you, Christianne, very much.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you so much. This has been great.
We'll try to get maybe your mom and dad on here too.
That would be interesting.
Thank you.
Until next time.
And that's how we say a long Midwest goodbye. Christianne looked at the community cookbook, and Catherine Allgood is who submitted the original meatloaf recipe to the Volga Tribune. And I'm pretty sure in my mom's meatloaf recipe, good hamburger simply means to use an 80 to 90% ground beef. Now remember, I posted pictures and Mary's meatloaf recipe on randomsweets.com, so simply go to that website or you'll find it in the show notes for this episode. This is a Random Sweets podcast. Please rate it, leave a review, and tell your friends about it. And if you haven't already, I hope you subscribe or follow Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens wherever you get your podcasts so that you are the first to know when a new episode is available. Sweet wishes!